Hi guys, BuildZoid here, and as you can clearly see, we're back on the RTX 2080 Ti BuildZoid edition. This is revision 0.4. This is the final revision, mostly because I don't think it's a complete revision because there's still some stuff that I wish worked different. I still wish the power mod worked the way I wanted it to work, but it doesn't work the way I want it to work, so it's back on 3 milliohm shunt resistors. But this is the final version, so I'm going to be sending the card back to the to the guy who basically like he's been a patron of the channel for like ages and ages and ages, and basically he was like, hey BuildZoid, I want you to mod my RTX 2080 Ti, I'll even pay for it. So that's kind of the story behind how I got this card, and this is the final setup of it, and he intends to run this daily, and probably it's going to stay on this air cool, like the stock heatsink. So that it's not great in my opinion, but as it is right now, the card actually manages to put down a rather impressive Firestrike Extreme score of 19,000 points in GT1, well, in the graphics tests. So that's the highest score I've managed to push out, set on this card. I think when it first came in, it was doing like 18,500 thereabouts. So yeah, it gets a really nice GPU score right now. I mean, it's not a huge jump, but it's an air-cooled Turing card. Like, there's not that much you can do with these. Yeah, so this is just the front. So it's staying on the FE cooler, which is not ideal, but it's not a complete disaster. For benchmarking, it actually has a good amount of like thermal. Like, it's heavy. So it has a decent amount of thermal mass, and it takes a while to get up to temperature. But I think in gaming, it's ultimately going to make even less of a difference than all the modifications made for benchmarking. But anyway, if he ever decides to run the card on like dry ice or liquid nitrogen, I think for dry ice, it's actually pretty much like it's done. For liquid nitrogen, I think the power limit might start being an issue rather early. But yeah, for dry ice, this thing would absolutely rip. For water cooling, it's the same situation as air cooling. Turing just doesn't scale on ambient temperatures with high voltages. So let's take a look at the back. So not much has changed, right? Since you've last seen it, I've added this switch right here. This switch allows you to go from, so like this, it's just it's not connected to anything. It's just the stock memory voltage control. And in this position, it puts the memory voltage at 1.4 volts or 1.39, somewhere around 1.4, 1.39 volts. Like, according to the calculator, it should be 1.39, but then when you solder things, sometimes, with the fact that I'm not using like super accurate resistors or anything, the tolerance is, so it's somewhere around 1.39 to 1.4, which is the upper limit of what GDDR6 is spec'd to operate at long term. And quite frankly, the GDDR6 data sheets actually say that the memory chips should survive even short-term stresses as high as 2 volts on the memory, like on the main VDDQ rail, assuming your VPP rail is high enough. The only concern I have there is I'm pretty sure it would blow out the memory controller if you actually went that high. I don't think the memory chips would die. I think it would kill the memory controller first. So and I'm judging that based off of like 1080 Ti's, where I think that was the exact same issue, where essentially if you ran your memory voltage really, really high, if you were on like on liquid nitrogen, you can run way higher memory voltage than on air, because if you do the same voltage on air, yes, the memory clocks just almost as well as it does when you're on liquid nitrogen. It's just that it kills the memory controller. So, yeah, with this, we're at 1.4 volts because it's like even lower than what you would, I think EVGA with the Kingpin edition, they were like, yeah, you can run up to like 1.45 for GDDR5X. Well, this is even lower. This is at 1.4 volts, just to be, extra safe. So yeah, and that does actually give the card a pretty good boost in memory overclocking capability. So I did not manage to break the 17 gigabits per second barrier, but I got really close. For benchmarks, I was running this thing at like 16.9 gigabits per second effective memory speed. So almost 17 gigahertz memory, like effective memory speed. But yeah, just barely under it, mostly because I'm pretty sure if I bumped up the voltage another 50 millivolts, it would have done it. It's just I don't want to, I don't want to find out where the memory controller dies. Not yet, anyway. So yeah, that gives the card a pretty nice boost in memory overclocking range. The capacitors actually also help. So we have a whole bunch of multi-layer ceramics. So there's these are 0603, 22 microfarad Murata Electronics multi-layer ceramics X6S material, which is a material like well, coefficient, not material, but basically they're good to like 105 degrees Celsius. And down to minus 85 or minus 55, something like that. I can't remember exactly what the negative temperature was, but the main concern is the high temperature. But yeah, so those are all rated for 105, which like most of the, I think for most PCBs, what you find used stock is X7R, which which is 125 degrees Celsius max temperature, but well, you can't get 2200 microfarads in a 0603 package at X7R. Like, they don't make those. They make X6S in this capacitance. And so, you know, I don't expect the back of the card to hit 105 degrees. It really shouldn't, as long as you know, it's run with a aggressive fan curve potentially. But yeah, and maybe also just has some airflow over the back, but it won't hit 105. Like this area of the GPU, like the core, I mean, it'll stay in like the 80s or something. It depends on the fan speed. So, you know, like if the card is hitting 105 in this area, there's other concerns, like say the GDDR6 memory chips themselves, which if I remember correctly are only rated to 95. So, you know, it's like, okay, well, yes, that's not ideal that the capacitors are out of spec, but the memory chips are already out of spec as well at that point. So anyway, so we have a bunch of capacitors, and when I first got the card, it was doing like 1300 megahertz offset in EVGA precision. So, you know, that's like, so that was where it topped out previously for benchmarking purposes. After the capacitors, it was doing like 1375, and now it does plus 1450, which equates to that 16.9 gigabits per second effective speed. Yeah, the bulk caps helped. I actually did these last, and it was actually quite impressive what a difference they made. So yeah, actually with these added, the card was almost able to run 1400, except it was like artifacting like crazy. But before those, it was doing the same thing at like 1375. And then with the memory voltage bump, so yeah, now it does 1450. So originally, the guy who sent me the card said he was like, when he was gaming with it, he only had it at like 1100 plus 1100 on the memory. This does have Samsung memory chips, so obviously that's why like if you're, you know, comparing it against like other RTX 2080 Ti's out there, a lot of the memory clock speed is the fact that this isn't on Micron, it's on Samsung. But anyway, so when he was like, when it was still stock, he would game on it at like 1100, he would bench it at 1300 memory. Now it benches 1450, so I'd say it can probably do like 1200, maybe 1250 for gaming. You know, that's my hopes. The memory doesn't seem to be doesn't seem to be temperature sensitive. So that's nice. Like, you know, I could run, you know, Firestrike Extreme on loop, and let the card hit, well, I don't know how long I left it on loop, but like the memory wasn't causing issues. It was the core that was starting to complain first. So anyway, so that's the memory situation. Oh yeah, and the bulk capacitors up here are 1200 microfarad Nichicon RS8 series aluminum polymers, and I use these because they're ultra, like the RS8 series from Nichicon is low ESR, low ESL. So essentially, the low ESL means they have a low equivalent series inductance, which means that they have a better frequency response. So yeah, that's why I go for those, because in theory those should work better than other aluminum polymers, which you can get in like lower ESRs. Like 5 milliohm ESR isn't really that expensive to get, but the issue is with those, the ESL is much worse than these. So the frequency curve for these looks a lot, well, it's not terrible for a much higher frequency range. Whereas for like say the RR5 series, which is the 5 milliohm ESR capacitors from Nichicon, those don't work very well at sort of like past 1 megahertz. They're absolutely atrocious, whereas these aren't ideal above a megahertz, but they still kind of work. So yeah, that's why I go for those. Same thing on the core. The core did not get any extra multi-layer ceramics because initially I was running the card with like a Morpheus, and just it's an issue of, if I do anything to the back of the core, then it, like, if you want to run some kind of mounting bracket to keep the PCB straight and not over tighten any kind of mounting system, then, well, having extra capacitors in this area is really not going to work. So that's why I left that entire area basically just, that entire area is untouched. Yeah, the capacitors on the core, I actually have no idea how much effect they had, because I did those before I did static voltage. So it's really like, you can't, compare it with cap mods on dynamic voltage, because it's just dynamic voltage, right? The voltage is bloody all over the place. So that's kind of unfortunate, but they're certainly not harming anything. I'm not sure that they're actually helping. So, yeah, that's kind of the situation with those. Then moving on to here, we have, of course, the core voltage control, which now actually works properly, now that I've changed the power modification. So this switch right here in this position, basically, so this is software voltage control enabled. This is volt mod. Potentiometer disabled. If we go like that, it enables the potentiometer, and your voltage will still float up and down a bit, because while this is far lower resistance than what the card normally use, like the stock voltage control circuit is set up with like tens of kilo ohms for the resistances, whereas this is set up in like 1 kilo ohm range. The voltage does still fluctuate if you keep the software voltage in control, like a little bit. It still floats around a little bit if you have the software voltage hooked up, so you can turn it off like that. So yeah, and if you run the card like this, it'll basically be stuck at like 0.73 volts or something like that, because that's the baseline voltage, just because of how the voltage control circuit works on these. That's not the feedback circuit, that's the actual control. So we are not screwing with the voltage that the VRM sees on the output. The chip here, the UP9512, knows exactly what's coming out of the VRM. We're actually telling it to output a different voltage. So this is like a very, very proper way of doing a volt mod, and it's even more proper because you can also like turn it off completely and everything. Whereas a lot of the time, it's just like, oh, the volt mod's not quite, well, a lot of the time you won't see people bother with things like that. So yeah, the card can actually run on completely bone stock voltage, which is kind of neat. I think this could have probably been achieved in one switch instead of two, but it certainly doesn't help that this is done in two. I mean, it certainly doesn't hurt that it's two separate switches as far as I'm concerned. It's not like you'll be fiddling with them a lot. At least you shouldn't be, because quite frankly, now that static voltage works, the best way to run this card, at least for benchmarks, is to just have it set up like that, and then just adjust your voltage on the potentiometer. And speaking of the voltage adjustment, the card seems to scale to about 1.06 volts. So yeah, that was really, like, the interesting thing about these cards is that if you don't, like, even if with no power limit, right, if I put it back on software voltage control, it'll normally not run above 1.03 volts. And this card has a, like, stupid high power limit BIOS on it. Like, this thing does not exceed 80% of TDP, even when I put it into static voltage mode, right? So even in static voltage mode with, like, 1.06 volts, it doesn't exceed, like, 85% of allowed power consumption. But yeah, if you put it on software voltage control, then it for some reason doesn't want to go above 1.03. So that does kind of mean that, this does actually now work properly, so it clocks a bit better when with this hooked up. And the main reason why this seems to be working properly now is I've given up on my old power mod. So previously, this card had a white wire running around, and then it would go down here, and there's basically, I replaced the shunt resistor here, with like a voltage divider, and I was trying this, like, I've done it on 10 series cards and it's worked great previously. And other older NVIDIA cards, there it's worked just fine, but with this card I was trying to do the same thing, and I either wired it wrong or, like, I screwed it up somehow. I don't think the mod itself is wrong, I think the way I implemented it was wrong. But ultimately what basically happened was, like, the mod wasn't working the way it was supposed to. So at some point I was just like, oh, screw it, I'll just put it back on shunts. That's so much simpler, and I don't have to, like, mess around with the wire, and, heatsink clearances and all that works out better if I just put it back on shunts. So now the card, instead of using the stock 5 milliohm shunts, which I don't actually have any of at all, I only use 3 milliohm shunts for everything. The card is now on 2 3 milliohm shunts, and that's why it doesn't actually read more than like 80% of TDP usage ever. Okay, it never exceeds that, which is kind of cool. So the power mod is now working properly, which is why the voltage control works properly. The end result is that, yeah, the card now puts out a higher score. Like, that, I think, is the main thing that really bumped the GPU score, the last sort of 300 points that I squeezed out of the card, because I got the card to be doing, like, consistently, like, 18,000, 700, 600, with just, like, the memory and the basic, you know, well, you know, all the other mods. But once I fixed the power mod, it bumped it up all the way to 19,000 once you fiddle with the like dial in the voltage and set your clocks up properly. So, yeah, also the clocks are like much more stable. It doesn't jump around as much now that the voltage is static, because ultimately the boost algorithm, right, it likes to try power manage the crap out of everything. So it would constantly just be like flickering the clocks and flickering the voltage, which might be more efficient in terms of power consumption, but it's certainly not better for your scores. This score is great. It's really not power efficient, though. Though I've not checked how much power it actually ends up pulling. So yeah, now it's on 3 milliohm shunt resistors, and that works great. So yeah, and basically since I've put this card in this condition, I've not had any issues with it in terms of running. And then to make sure that, you know, you can put the card down flat on a desk, I've also added sort of like, there. You can see how I've basically added some, like I replaced the stock screws and added a whole bunch of nuts on there so that basically they raise the card up if you decide to put it like down like this, because this heatsink is very, very heavy, especially considering how bad it is as cooling. It is really freaking heavy. And I was really worried that, you know, if you just put the card down on the desk like this, it would just break start breaking things on the back eventually. So those are there basically to keep the card like safe to put down like this. And yeah, that is the RTX 2080 Ti Buildzoid Edition revision 0.4. New power mod, bunch of capacitors. Capacitors are good. Voltage control works. Power mod I'm not happy with. Like, I still think that like I should have gotten the other mod working. Memory voltage control, well, memory voltage, it's not control, it's just memory voltage boost works great. Helps memory overclocking quite significantly. Shame that it's still on the Founders Edition heatsink, but yeah, in this condition the card just works better. And it does look really good. And also, if anybody's wondering about this right here, I did actually check with the guy who, like, you know, I guess gave me the card for modding, right? So that's one way to put it, because it's not really on loan. So yeah, I checked with him if, you know, like, he's okay with this, because obviously I understand, like, I guess my taste in things is relatively tacky, but basically I was like, hey, I can take this off, because it's just Sharpie, right? So it comes off with alcohol. And he said, nah, just leave it on there. So that is like, I'm not going to adjust anything on this card anymore. Like, that's it. It's finished. And yeah, my main, like, voltage control works the way I want it to. My main annoyance is the power mod. Like, I'm really, really annoyed about that. It's just like, why couldn't I get it working the way I wanted it to? But yeah. So, you know, I've been also thinking that if it wasn't so stupid difficult to remove the top, like the fan portion of this heatsink, it would probably be really sensible to swap out the stock fans with like a 3-fan setup, so that you can actually use, because there's fins down there, right? Like, there's fins throughout this middle section. So it would be like a potentially good thermal mod that doesn't involve like a lot of money would be to buy like 3 92mm fans, right? And just swap out these two. Especially if you get like thicker 92mm fans, because that's the other thing. Thicker fans move more move more air at lower RPM, so than like these guys. So yeah, you could replace these with some better fans, but unfortunately, Nvidia made the shroud incredibly difficult to disassemble, because I guess they're like, Nvidia must be a huge fan of Apple, Because, I mean, this looks like an Apple-designed GPU as well. Like, you can't deny that. So, anyway, yeah, that's it. That's the 2080 Ti BuildZoid edition. Hopefully, I mean, I don't know. I'm just glad it's done at this point, quite frankly. I did not enjoy all the issues, and the main issue is, like, I'd really like to test the card on, like, sub-ambient cooling, because as I said, on ambient, like, this does a bit, but it's really not groundbreaking. And so I'd love to test it on sub-ambient cooling, because if I could take it sub-zero, like, I think this thing would absolutely fly. Or at least not completely suck. Because this should be more than enough voltage, because this is limited to 1.16 volts, so it should be more than enough voltage for, like, dry ice overclocking. And the power limit should still hold up fine up to that level. So, yeah. Anyway, so yeah, huge thanks to the guy who sent the card in. I'm gonna have to spend, like, a lot of time, like, figuring out how to pack this up, because I mean, like, this is good for dealing with desks. It doesn't solve the whole issue of how do you pack this card so that, you know, like, I don't want shear stress on anything on the back of it, because that's just gonna ruin everything. But yeah. Now it's just a case of package it and send it back, and hopefully I don't see it back. Like, hopefully it doesn't get returned to me in a year for being dead or something. That would really suck. But okay, well, that's not a good idea. Right, yeah, that switch juts over. So, yeah, that's it. I mean, there's not much else on the card. It's basically a stock card. So, thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. And actually, I should do the whole thing like this. Oh yeah, that looks good. Leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. If you're wondering about getting a card modified like this, I'm gonna have to turn you down. Because yeah, this was like the guy's relatively lucky to be for managing to talk me into this. Like, if this wasn't an RTX 2080 Ti, then I would have probably just turned him straight down. Just because this is a card, like, I really wanted to try mess with, partially, and so it was like, well, this is really, really risky, but now that I've played with an RTX 2080 Ti, I just, yeah, no. No more of this. This is far too sketchy to do, like, regularly, in my opinion, and we'll see how this one works out in the long run. So anyway, however, if you would like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, which does include, like, I will be putting out guides for how, you know, how to do all of this stuff. I mean, I think I've already put out guides for how to do all of it anyway, but you know, if you'd like to, like, I do guides like that, so, you know, it's like one way to potentially be able to do this stuff yourself is to support what I do with the channel, in which case I have a Patreon. There's also Teespring with, like, socks and shirts, and hopefully over time I hope to add other stuff as well. You can find all of that down in the description below, and yeah, thanks for watching, and goodbye. I need to go find the mouse. Oh, there it is. Where's the stop button? There.